So welcome back to our final afternoon session. A few announcements before we get started. The sacred fire will be burning out at 2 o'clock. So we'll be collecting the tissues in the paper bags and bringing the tears to the fire for 2 o'clock. Also, another reminder, those of you who didn't hear me earlier, on your table, you'll find a survey to be completed. You can complete it old school with pen, or you could scan this little code with your smartphone. Once you've completed the survey and shared your voice with us, please leave the completed survey on the table, and we have a great team of volunteers to pick these up. I also want to say thank you to you for adopting a youth at lunch. We had a wonderful conversation at lunch with listening and learning and sharing, so I thought that was a wonderful idea. Now we're ready to get started, and it's an honor to introduce the National Advisory Committee panel working together in the search and recovery of residential school missing children. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about what the National Advisory Council does. The Council was created to provide Indigenous and communities and families independent, trusted, and expert information related to all aspects of the search for children who never returned home from the Indian residential school system. The National Advisory Center brings together individuals with a wide range of knowledge and experience in areas of Indigenous laws and protocol, forensics, archaeology, archival research, and working with survivors. The NAC is guided by a distinctions-based circle of survivors, inclusive of First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people. Survivors also sit on the National Advisory Committee. The NAC promotes a survivor-centric, trauma-informed, and holistic approach to all stages of the search and recovery of our children that did not return home from Indian residential school. On the stage, I'm very pleased to present to you Jackie Bouvier, Dr. Rebecca Jacques, and Dr. Keisha Supernant. They will each have 15 minutes to share, with Jackie starting us off, Dr. Rebecca Jacques, and our final speaker, Dr. Keisha Supernant. And then we will have a question and answer period following the panel. I will pass the floor to our wonderful panel. Thank you.
Tansekiawao. Nioma Jacqueline Bouvier Sikasuyan. Igwa schooling ituhtian Alacross for 4 months. Tuhtim Beauval Residential School for 6 years. For the past 2 years, I have been working with the Office of the Interlocutor and National Advisory Committee and NCTR regarding 2 of my baby sisters. We know are buried in the cemetery in Beauval. August 29th was an announcement made by the English River First Nations. 93 detections of buried children. 2 of those we believe are my baby sisters. I thank the Creator for guiding me through this. It's hard. The week of August 29th, was not a good week for me. But we are finally at peace. I feel we are at peace. My mother was a survivor at a residential school, and she thought she had a grade 9, but she worked. She was an orphan. She never went home, and she worked in the basement making uniforms. My two baby sisters are from her first marriage. They were born in the 1920s. And they died, the oldest, Louise, died 8 months old. Then there was a son who lived to adulthood. Then Mary Rose was born, and she died 11 months. My mother faced racism because she was Dene with the Métis family, de Rocher, that she married. She called it arranged marriage from the school. My mom never spoke about anything that happened to her in a residential school. She lived till 92 years old. She spoke 5 languages. People used to come and interview her, and I'd say, who are they? I don't know, they just want to know about the school. So who knows where my mom's history is? All over Europe, maybe? I don't know. My dad worked for the Beauval Residential School, which is Isidore Bouvier. That was her second marriage. Her first marriage, he died of TB at a young age. My mother had 4 children after her first husband died. Before she married my dad, Isidore Bouvier, legitimate children. Indian agents came in. My sister, they put in an orphanage because she didn't have a husband. And she was Métis. She wasn't an orphan. I remember going to visit her in the orphanage in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. She looked so sad. And then when we were going home to Beauval, I asked, Mom, why is she looking sad? Oh, a lot of things are happening with her. Then the RCMP came to our door in Beauval, and they said that they sent my sister to the mental hospital in North Balford because she attempted suicide in the orphanage. They gave her shock treatment, ice baths. This is my sister. She was raped by a priest in the orphanage, and she doesn't know, and we don't know, she had a girl, a baby girl. What really got me going to work with finding my baby sisters was the announcement in Kamloops. Thank you to the people that are here. And speaking with the Office of the Interlocutor in the Truth and Reconciliation. I was abused in a residential school, physically, mentally, emotionally. spiritually. I was a naughty girl, and I would talk to my classmates in Cree, and the nuns would come in and strap me. I want to share this with you. Valentine's Day, we were making hearts. The nun came to me and said, "You color your heart black because you have a black heart." That stuck with me for years. I walked slow. I had 2 hip replacements. Now they're saying I need knee replacements, but I'm not going to get knee replacements. I'm 71 years old. And this is caused by the physical abuse. Sexual abuse happened in the back of the chapel. I was a very angry person. I didn't have a youth, and I commend the youth that are here and speaking. My mom died in 1999. My father died in 1964. My mother was a proud Dene woman, but she faced racism, and I think she didn't have nutrition to feed her babies breast milk. That is why they died. There's only 2 of us left in the family. My brother is 80 and lives in Saskatoon. My mom's dying wish was to find our brother who was taken, 60 scoop, for us to find him. We did find him a year after my mother passed away. He lives in the United States. We are getting together in Seattle. He lives in Nevada. He had a lot of questions to me in regards to who his father was and what was Mama like. I told him about Mama, but I didn't know who his father is. My brother that lives in Saskatoon, when the Indian agent came in to my mom's house, her friend was there who was married. They were ready to take my brother, and the friend said, "No, I'll take him." So that's where my brother went till the Indian agents stopped coming. I'm not a savage anymore, like they told me I was. I held that in me, and I said, I must be a savage. I went into alcoholism. I was angry. What changed my life is when my brother committed suicide, who was deaf and attended school for the deaf. He was 71 years old. He went through a lot in Saskatoon Deaf School. He graduated, worked hard. This was after his retirement. Because of the trauma, there is a lot of suicidal in my family. What really changed my mind too is I had cancer and I can't have any children. My niece came up to me at 16 and she said, "I'm going to have a baby. Do you want to adopt, Auntie?" I said, "Yes." So I have a 42-year-old son. who's a guidance, thank you. Okay, who is a guidance counselor at a Native Education Center at Vancouver. I'm a guest in Vancouver, and I have been a guest. It's not my territory. I come from Treaty 10 in Métis homeland. I'm a guest in Vancouver, and I sit as an elder in Vancouver Coastal Health. I know my mama, ready? I know my mama is beside me, and I often say to myself, what would mama say? This is my mom and dad. Yo, is it there? Huh? Yeah. Yeah. Oh, he's got it. No. Can you put my mom and dad up? Not that. That's not my. Okay. Wee. My time will be up by the time they figure it out. This is my mom and dad, Isidore Bouvier and Elizabeth Gunn DeRocher Bouvier, on the steps of the residential school. Next one. This one is us getting our confirmation. That's me to the right with my hands up and my bangs cut short. And that's the principal of the Beauval Residential School. He was the abuser, Father Chamberlain. He was charged. I think he has passed. And it says in the back, my friend said, Jesus loves all children. Next one. This is the English River Cemetery, where the 93 GPR detections was done. This is phase 1. I believe that the 2 flags to the right are my baby sisters. This is part of my healing. I will get this done. I will have a ceremony in the spring. They were crying, I believe they were crying before, till this detection. And now they're happy, and they'll be at peace. Once I have the cemetery, I have the ceremony, and I think already they're with my mom and dad, my mom and stepdad. Marci kantotamin kakyo Nimuhtin Utagapian. Thank you, everyone, for listening to my story. I'm moving forward finally. I thought it would take longer than 2 years, but with the support of the agencies, I wouldn't be where I am talking about this. Thank you very much.
Kinenaskomtin Kokum. That's a very difficult story to follow, but it really shows why we need to put survivors first in all the work we do. Tanse, awasa kapikiwita hatnet sikatson amiskutiwa skaigano chinia utipimisi waknia. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Keisha Supernant. I am Métis, citizen of the Métis Nation of Alberta. My family roots are in Alberta as well as back to Red River. And in fact, it's a real honor to be here because I am descended from some men who joined the Voyageurs and came west and never came back, who came from Akwesasne and Ganawage about 200 years ago. I'm currently living and working in Amiskwaciwa-Skaigan, or Edmonton, Alberta, on Treaty 6 territory in the Métis homeland. And there I am a professor in the Department of Anthropology and direct an institute called the Institute of Prairie and Indigenous Archaeology. And I have the great honor of sitting on the National Advisory Committee with other Indigenous experts, survivors, and to be guided by wonderful and amazing survivors such as Jackie, who sit on our circle of survivors. So begin, of course, by honoring the survivors of residential school and all of the courage and bravery it took to be here, because you survived. And so grateful that you did, because it means we are all here today. I am an intergenerational survivor myself. My father grew up in child welfare system and foster care, so I didn't know much about my family, and it's actually been through this work I found out just a few months ago that my great-grandmother went to residential school at Gruard, Alberta. So that has opened up some of my own family stories, and now we're trying to find out more information about that. But my role on the National Advisory Committee is one of helping to provide information around the role of ground searching in the process, sacred process of finding those who did not survive and did not come home. I specialize in using technology such as ground penetrating radar and other sorts of technology to do ground searches. But I always want to begin by saying that ground searching is only one small part of what is a very complex journey. Ground searching can play an important role in certain ways, but it can't always provide the answers that communities are looking for. So it's best to understand it as part of a much larger journey. And I think Jackie's story about her baby sisters is a really good example. There were GPR anomalies, detections found in an area, but without Jackie's knowledge of where in the cemetery her baby sisters were buried, we wouldn't know who those were from ground penetrating radar alone. So there has been, of course, a necessary focus on ground searching, especially after the news shared by Tecumseh about the ground penetrating radar work they did there. And it has provided, I think, a method of finding specific locations where children may be buried. But the thing to remember with ground penetrating radar is that it is really only looking for shapes in the ground related to potential unmarked graves. It's not an X-ray, it can't find the bodies or bones. It's much more like an ultrasound where you see shapes and then we try to interpret those shapes. There are vast landscapes around every single residential school, and these landscapes are obviously places that survivors, elders, and communities are looking to search. It's really important to remember that every school is unique in its own way. It has its own unique history, both in terms of how long it was in operation, which children were stolen to that place from which communities, but also what's happened since the residential school was in operation. So while we know that the last one didn't close until the late 1990s, there are some that closed in the 1920s or 30s, 40s, 50s, and those ones will have a different history of the land, what's happened to it. I have had the privilege of working with the Métis local in St. Albert on the Youville Institution, for example. The Youville Institution was in the heart of what is now the city of St. Albert. So the lands that the school was on are almost entirely under the center of a city. So this is a particular case where ground penetrating radar may not provide the answers because there's not much left to search. So any time that a ground search is undertaken, at least from the work that I've done, and I've now had the honor and of being able to help 12 different schools to do ground surveys, is to be guided first by survivors, elders, and community members. The knowledge in community, we know that children didn't come home. We don't need GPR to prove that. There's so much knowledge in community, and there's extensive knowledge in the archive as well. But what the ground searching can do is provide more specific locations where survivors have knowledge of there potentially being children. This can be anything from a historic cemetery where there are no markers left to other places where children may have gone missing. When you listen to survivors and community members and elders, it's then important to have someone you can trust to help you figure out what the best ways to search those areas are. Ground penetrating radar works really well in certain conditions. Certain types of soil, certain types of environments work quite well. But I have now been involved in 2 separate places where GPR did not work at all. Where we're in a cemetery and we're looking for graves, we know there are graves there. The ground penetrating radar just doesn't see them because the soil is not right. So if you're investing in a ground search, for those of you involved in search teams, it's really important that you have a trusted source of information and someone who can give you good advice about what's possible. It's also remembering that things like ground penetrating radar are really designed for those burials. So if you're concerned about children who went missing under other circumstances where they may not have been buried in any kind of formal way, ground penetrating radar may not be the best answer for your community. So one of the things we hope to do with the National Advisory Committee is be that place for you to come. The majority of us are Indigenous. We have backgrounds and different aspects of this work, and we're not invested in this from we're not trying to sell you anything. We're here to listen. We're here to provide advice, to give you some guidance on what might work for your community, to allow you to make an informed decision. Because there are folks out there who might have ground penetrating radar who may not know how to do this work in a way that will give you the answers that you need. And there are times where you may spend a lot of effort and energy searching in an area where ground penetrating radar might not work. So it's really important to be able to have information at hand to know where the searching can really help. Also, it depends on the answers that you're looking for. Ground penetrating radar can detect what we call anomalies. We know that term is not what a lot of communities prefer. The reason we use it is because when you have ground penetrating radar, you're sending a wave into the ground and you're looking at basically the soil's the same and then it changes and the wave can change. So we call that anomalous, meaning it's different from what's around. But what that really represents, of course, is that potential grave. But with ground penetrating radar alone, we can't know what's in that or confirm that it's a grave. There are other things that need to be brought to bear for that. And that information sometimes sits in families, like in Jackie's case with her baby sisters. It sometimes sits in archives where there is information about deaths and where those deaths, those children may have been buried. But as I think you'll hear if you're in one of the sessions this afternoon, there are children who go missing from the records who are transferred to places far away, Indian hospitals, sanatoria. I live in Edmonton. The Charles Council is notorious in Alberta for taking children who had TB and they never went home. And they could be buried in Edmonton. So it's really important to kind of trace as much as you can through the knowledge that already exists and then bring that ground penetrating radar or other technology to help provide those answers. And this can lead to the opportunity to protect the land. I've worked with communities where we're searching areas that no longer are in the hands of the community. There's one example where we were doing work that the former school site, the building is gone, it's now an RCMP barracks. And so trying to search in those areas becomes difficult, but if we can find something there, community then can get that land back, make sure it's protected, do ceremony, do commemoration, and do further investigation. So this is the place that I see the technology having, is going from that knowledge of we know there's something happening over here, to bringing in these tools to say, okay, here's where we're seeing things in the ground, and then the community can decide how they want to move forward with that work. Anytime you start doing ground searching, it is very difficult for communities and for survivors in particular. It brings up all kinds of trauma. So when my team comes out to do the work, we always start in ceremony. And just at an example of a couple weeks ago, we started in the lodge. And we sat with the survivors and elders guiding the work, and we sat with the ancestors for whom we were doing the work. And we started in that good way. And having those wraparound supports for survivors as we do the work is really important, because many survivors are sharing their stories for the first time. And sometimes us being in community is their first opportunity to share with us or with their community their experiences in residential school. So coming to this work also with that sense of ceremony and sacredness, which is another part that I've really appreciated about the National Advisory Committee, is that we recognize the sacredness of this work. And then just the final piece I wanted to touch on is, anytime you're using the technology, data is being generated. And when we're talking about data of ground penetrating radar, these are the resting places potentially of ancestors. And it's really important to work in a way that respects and upholds Indigenous data sovereignty, so that that information sits with the nation, sits with the survivors, and is not something that a company is taking or a university is taking. This is really, really important. And this is another conversation that we have at the National Advisory Committee, of ensuring that communities who may not have the capacity yet to do all of this work themselves, how can we build that? How can we make sure that every nation doesn't need to come to an outsider, whether they're Indigenous or not, doesn't need to hire a company, but can do this work in a good way in their own community, build that capacity and care for those places. So we're very interested in working with nations to figure out what that looks like. And I just want to also extend the invitation that if you are working on a research team and you need a trusted source of advice, you wanted to talk with me and my team or the folks in the National Advisory Committee, please reach out. We all come to this work because we want to be of service and we want to help in the best way we can. And we want to ensure that nations are getting good and reliable advice in order to walk this very, very difficult but very important and sacred journey of finding the missing children. So hi, and thank you for listening.
Tanchi, bonjour, Sego. Thank you for welcoming me into this traditional territory. It is always an honor to attend these national gatherings, because it gives me the opportunity to meet so many survivors from everywhere, and the honor to listen to what they have to share. I also have the privilege to speak to you today as a committee member of the National Advisory Committee. My name is Dr. Jocks. You can call me Rebecca. I'm a citizen of Métis Nation of Ontario, and I come from the Métis homeland of the North Shore of Lake Huron. I also work as a forensic pathologist and investigating coroner in the province of Ontario, and I've been invited to speak to you today about the forensic work. As you know, the TRC had many calls to action, but specifically calls to action 71 to 76 refer to the unmarked burials. And as a forensic pathologist, call to action number 74, which calls for the reburial in home communities were requested of our children, really speaks to me as a forensic pathologist, because in order to do it properly requires scientific exhumation, identification, examination, and repatriation. For families and communities that decide to choose forensic work in the search and recovery of our children, this works in conjunction with preparatory research, including oral histories, as we heard today with Jackie, other records, and also after insight examinations, such as ground penetrating radars. In the forensic contents, each of these types of information and data that's generated is a form of evidence. So many of you may be wondering what forensic disciplines can offer in the search and recovery of our children. And I'm going to talk about 5 questions that I commonly get from families and communities looking for their children. And in my answers, I'll be using the term human remains. And what I mean by that is a dead body or a portion of a dead body. And this can include an intact skeleton or even small bone fragments. So what is forensics is one of the first questions I get. And what I hear is, oh, forensic disciplines like forensic pathology, forensic anthropology, forensic biology, oh, you work for evidence for the legal system in criminal cases. And you would be correct. But there's another part of forensics that you may not know, because it's not really shown on TV shows or books. That's the humanitarian work that we do. And that relates to identification of dead bodies, but also to have an understanding of what happened to them and why they died. And we do this using a postmortem examination, also known as an autopsy, incorporate history and descriptions of what is known about loved ones, and applying a variety of techniques, such as comparing DNA from loved ones that have died to living biological family members to make identifications, so that we are sure that when we return loved ones back to their families, they are going to the appropriate family. So then that family can honor and commemorate their loved ones. In addition, it has been stated before, but requires further emphasis here. Reconciliation starts with truth. Forensics is a tool for truth finding from a scientific perspective. However, forensic disciplines do not hold all the answers. Like other forms of Western science, there is a need for this to be used alongside laws, ethics, knowledge, and spiritual practices and protocols of Indigenous people. The second question that I get all the time is, well, what role can forensics play in residential schools' unmarked burials? Forensic disciplines can play a role in residential schools if families and communities choose to exhume, which means to remove the land from unmarked burials, examine human remains, and make possible identification. This can only be achieved by performing a scientific exhumation, an autopsy, and using ancillary investigations and histories of the person that died, but also requires partnerships with families and communities. Forensics provides a systemic, stepwise approach for the dignified search, recovery, examination, and possible identification of human remains that may be discovered in burials. This can be achieved also by respecting Indigenous protocols and ceremonies, much like Dr. Supernat talks about with her work. The way we can approach this is using a staged approach. So, for example, after the ground penetrating radar and other technologies identify potential or probable burials, you can do a superficial exhumation, removing the upper layers of the soil, and then you can confirm, well, this is truly a burial. The next step that you can do is actually go on to do a full exhumation, and the information that you can get from that is to identify if human remains are still in that burial. Third, you can go on to actually examine these human remains to get information like the estimated biological age, look for any disease or injury in the bones. And finally, if you choose to, you can go on and take a DNA sample to support an identification process. Forensics is an essential tool for humanitarian action. It can bring many answers and relief to bereaved families and their communities. By helping fulfilling obligations towards the dead, we can all assert our own humanity. The uniqueness of forensic applications in humanitarian work is that it provides a box full of tools and knowledge adaptable to different settings, which can assist in humanitarian work on the dead. It is also this knowledge and expertise that make us expert witnesses in courts of law. So common services that we do is the scientific exhumation, which I've talked about, but this is a destructive process because you are actually removing the land. You can't put every little soil back in its place. But it's also where identification starts and the chain of custody, which is very important for legal proceedings, if these are to go on to legal processes. Second is identification. This requires the preparatory research based on documentation, oral history, and other records. Identification starts where the human remains are found and ideally ends with returning those loved ones back to their appropriate families. But there is many steps in between to do this, including having living biological family members to get a DNA sample, obtaining a DNA sample from human remains. This is with a lot of challenges, and there is a likelihood that many of these children will not be identified. So prior to exhumation, considerations about people being willing to give a DNA sample needs to be considered, but also how we're going to honor and commemorate children that are not identified. We also can provide causes of death, but this is very challenging, just much like identifications. Forensic pathologists are really faced in a difficult position to determine cause of death because the cause of death would have to be present in the bones. And most causes of death are in soft tissues like the brain, the heart, and lungs. So in most cases, there'll be an undetermined cause of death, which means we don't know why that child died. We also provide expert testimony, and this is due to the widening knowledge between layperson and experts. The role of experts has become increasingly important in legal procedures, such as criminal trials. Expert witnesses are individuals that are permitted to give opinions based on their specialized knowledge, experience, and training. Forensic experts testify in courts of law as expert witness, as we serve as credible sources of evidence that may be used in the legal system to support your claims of truth. We are also accustomed to seeing systemic approaches that utilize forensics, medicine, and science that can be scrutinized not only by our peers, but also by the legal system. We're really used to being under the microscope. But our work doesn't end with the legal system. We also have next of kin clinics where family members have an opportunity to ask experts about what they observed and what's in their reports. And this is supported by health and wellness. The third question that I get is, what are the limitations of the forensic work? And they predominantly fall into four. First, whole bodies are very unlikely to be recovered. There may be bones present within unmarked burials, but children's bones do not persist as long as adults and may disappear due to natural breakdown. Second, it may not be possible to identify all human remains. There likely will be very few, if any, identifications. And the uncertainty of not knowing the identity of loved ones for bereaved families before the confirmed identification can be extremely distressing. So considerations of what to do with unidentified human remains, despite exhaustive efforts, needs to be decided before the work is underway. Third, unlike the TV show, forensic work takes years, not weeks. And fourth, forensic experts are largely housed in death investigation systems that are largely a colonial construct. There are few forensic experts that are Indigenous, and we are here to help. And the death investigation systems are interested in assisting. But it has to be done in a way that puts relationships first, it's transparent and accountable, it's culture and trauma informed, and it recognizes and appreciates the reciprocal capacity and expertise of Indigenous knowledge holders. In addition, there is no national death investigation system in Canada, and so the standards are variable. The fourth question that I get asked are, what are reasonable goals of the forensic work? Well, there are a few. One, we have the opportunity to honor and commemorate our children. We also have the possibility of scientific correlation with other records and learn more about our children. We also have the opportunity to build capacity in Indigenous communities and Indigenous police services. Yesterday, there was a few members from different Indigenous police services. This is an opportunity to build capacity in these different services. And finally, the last question I get asked, what should I consider for exhumation? First, I think you need to consider about creating protocols of engagement to address the potential cultural gulf between Indigenous peoples and the forensics teams in order to formalize this partnership. 2, to think about the willingness of affected biological families to provide DNA samples for the purpose of identification of recovered human remains. I think this is a really great example of a great partnership between families and forensics related to a national DNA strategy that is embedded in Indigenous ethics. 3, how unidentified children will be honored and commemorated. I don't think anyone wants to exhume these children for them just to be put and stored for decades. 4, the intention to pursue accountability through legal systems in the event that the forensic work results in evidence that could be used in criminal prosecution. A lot of my work as a forensic pathologist and investigating coroner looks at the decedent, but law enforcement and the legal system has to do an investigation of perpetrators. As a forensic pathologist, I don't arrest people, unlike what some of the TV shows show. And finally, consider the impact on families and communities. Miigwech.
Yo. Jackie, Rebecca et Keisha, je rappelle que vous êtes membres du comité aviseur national. I would like to remember that you are members of the National Advisory Committee. And now, I'm sure in the room, there are many people who would like to ask you questions or for maybe clarifications. Donc, on est rendu à une période de questions. J'imagine qu'il y en a plusieurs parmi vous qui aimeraient poser des questions à nos 3 panélistes. Moi, je vous inviterai à venir au micro. Nous avons 3 micros, un ici à la gauche, au milieu et au centre. Et je vous inviterai aussi à être le plus bref possible dans vos questions ou commentaires afin de permettre à un plus grand nombre de gens possible de pouvoir s'adresser à nos panélistes. Donc, the floor is open. We have 3 mics, 1, 2, and 3. Et puis, I would like to ask you to be as brief as possible to allow as many people as possible to address questions to our panelists. And also, I would like to invite you to introduce yourself because I don't know all your name by heart. So, okay, microphone numéro 2, s'il vous plaît. Introduce yourself. Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Margaret Obichon. I'm a survivor. How are you guys? Today I'm standing here in front of a lot of people. I'm not against finding the missing children. But right now, we are the survivors that are alive and need answers. We come all the time to be together and say, survivors, the missing children, the bones, the body. But what about us? Are we slowly going to deteriorate before we find answers? And how are we going to be able to tell our children, grandchildren? My mother, my grandmother were both residential survivors. But my mother never told us about how she was treated at the residential. But we sooner found, as we are getting older, we kind of look at it and we kind of understood our mother, why she kind of mistreats, not all the time, but frustration gets so easy, temper gets so easy. I sooner found out myself the system my mother grew up as a young teenager. She was a beautiful lady. And if we are going to continuously look for spending time looking for the missing children and the bones and the body, what about us? Like I said, where's our answers? And how are we going to continuously survive and continuously be strong? I'm not against, like I said, I'm not against finding the missing children. Yes, if it was my child, maybe I would want it found. Or if I was the one that died at that time, would I have been found? Would I have been time lost to me, to them trying to find me? I don't think so. But let's put our minds together, and for the young people that were up there before, let them be the leaders of the parliament. We need women to be in power. Women have the voice and women are strong. So we need women, and we need young people to take over what the government is trying, but the government is lacking because with funds and everything, and it's going to be time like this, time after time. We say another gathering at another place, are we going to say finding the missing children? But what about us? What about me? I'm standing here, I want to find answers. I want the government to help. I want my children to understand me. You know, as I got married in 1967, abuse is out of the question for me. You know, I don't usually use the word hate, but I hated that word abuse. Love is the most important thing in life, in reality. If love is stronger, we will be strong. But if our love is not strong, we as parents, grandparents, will continuously abuse. And look at our young people, what's happening to our young people today. Suicide, that's what you hear now. Suicide, taking their own lives, because we never give them enough love. We never taught them enough love. So we as parents and grandparents have the biggest responsibility and the role models of our life and our children and grandchildren. How can they continue life? How can our children and grandchildren continue? Are they going to be abusive? Are they going to be hatred? Or what is it? What do we give our children, our grandchildren? Love. Take the word love in your heart. And you'll always feel loved and you'll always feel young. Today I'm standing here. I'm not young. I'm 75 years old. And I became a widow going on 5 years. It was hard. It was the biggest thing that I ever lost in my life.
So I would like to thank you for your sharing with us, your testimony.
Yes.
And we heard you loud and clear and loud.
I'm not finished. If you would give me time, don't rush people off when they want to say something.
I know,
but thank you so much for listening. I'm not trying to be rude or anything. Don't cut anybody when they're talking.
I
Make them
don't-
finish their story.
I know,
Thank
but
you.
we have many speakers, and we would like to hear from as many people as possible. Thank you. Microphone numéro 1, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, bonjour. So my name is Elma Moses. I'm Dr. Elma Moses from the Cree Nation of East Maine, living in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, and I'm also a residential school survivor. So I'm here today, for our missing relatives in search of our ancestors. And we know, like my family, we know where our ancestors, our relatives who didn't make it back, we know where they are, which cemetery they are in, even though they're not on the list of, even though they're not on the list of the missing children that did not make it back. And for me, I'm a second generation residential school survivor. My dad, who is 95 years old, I am here because his older brother, Henry, is missing, and his younger sister, Petrus, did not make it home. And we know on Fort George Island where they are. And we would like, for me anyways, I would like to have at least a memorial remembrance for them, Not necessarily all the, I'll call it the rigmarole, of the pathologists. We know that they are missing, because these are our family members that did not make it back. So the reason why I mention those things is that the federal government has, like for the veterans, they have memorial plaques for them with their names and everything, So, and it's paid out of our tax dollars, because I'm a taxpayer too. So if something like that could be put in place for them, instead of all these different things that we are doing right now, search dogs, ground penetrating, because some of it, they may consider it as desecrating the sites, the graves of our missing relatives. We know they're there. Mm-hmm. We know.
Okay.
I myself, so that's why I said, could we speed it up and just, do a memorial, something, plaque or something, in their memory. So that's...
So, miigwech, doctor, and I believe that Keisha might have something to share with you. Keisha?
Yes. Yeah, I just wanted to respond a little bit. I also wanted to respond to the previous survivor and just want to say that we heard you and we understand that you deserve answers. And that's why I think it's really important to recognize the power of the stories of survivors and that they also need to be passed on. So I just wanted to quickly mention that. I think that in cases such as you shared, where you know where they are, you don't need to do ground penetrating radar or search dogs or forensics if you know they're there. And I believe there is funding for memorials. So if you talk with the folks, the funding that Crown and Indigenous Northern Relations Canada, CERNAC, there is money for specifically creating those memorial plaques and things like that. So there is money for that. And in many cases, I think that's what communities want as an outcome. Ones I've worked with, they don't want to exhume, especially in a cemetery, because you don't know who you're digging up. Unless you know exactly where, which in many cases you don't know, then maybe the names, those children who are missing, that they can put something there that can be a place of ceremony, can be a place of memory. So I believe there is funding. And certainly if you come over to our table and chat with us after or go down there, we can help connect you with the right people to help move forward with that for you and for your family.
Can I just respond to that? Because in terms of the veterans, the federal veterans, you know, there's a process. Do they ask the families if they want for funding? They do it themselves, the Veteran Affairs. So that's what I'm saying, you know. Why do we have to ask funding to have that? So that process, I agree. I don't agree with it, you know, because I'll just say it, we were kidnapped when we were first my parents' generation, myself too, you know. These are the 1940s, 1930s that happened. Me, it's in the 1960s. Now we have to beg the governments for something that they did, so we can fund the memorial thing. So that part I don't agree about it. So I just want to comment on that.
We appreciate it, Miigwech.
Huh?
We appreciate it, Miigwech.
All right, thank you.
Again, you know, I have no choice, but I have to ask people to be as brief as possible. Microphone numéro 3, s'il vous plaît.
Amagat isul is alulal DYU Lusky Ktiptegu Lakwala Ams Diwo Watgu Leche in Diwol Zagu Shimshan Nuyu. Good afternoon. My Shimshan name is Alulal. My English name is Valine, and I am the project manager for the Crosby Girls School in the Miller Bay Hospital. So those two entities were open for decades. And as we heard in these conferences, many communities, many nations went all over the place. So my question is, how does Lakwalams and the Miller Bay Hospital project create a system where we're able to talk to these other nations or these other individuals or these other families that will be affected by the work that we're doing?
I don't mean to be the only one talking, but they keep looking at me to say. Thank you for sharing that. This is a real challenge and an important question. There is no one nation, one school. Children were stolen and taken. I've been working at Poundmakers Lodge, Industrial School in Edmonton. We have children from your territory who were stolen there, right? So we know this is an issue. I think there's been different approaches taken in different places. I know in British Columbia, for example, there are the lead communities who are coming together to share that knowledge with each other. But it is difficult to ensure that every survivor is getting information and being engaged in that process, because often you're continually uncovering new nations whose children were taken. And hospitals are particularly challenging this way because it can be harder to trace those home nations for those children. So I think that, you know, is there one right way to do it? I don't think so. I think sort of figuring out as much as you can who was affected and doing that outreach and trying to figure out what works for that communication so that there's enough people hearing. Sometimes they're creating survivor societies where survivors can all be invited to come together. There's other cases where they're trying to put out communication. But I would say that this is a piece that we need more attention to because it can be really challenging, because lead communities are often really focused on survivors in their community, which of course is important, but then there's that broader community of survivors. So having open gatherings, trying to make sure that people know that there's an opportunity to come and engage can be really important. And that can lead then to those survivors knowing other survivors, sort of creating that community. So I think that this is something that a lot of nations are still figuring out, and there may be folks in the room who are on the ground doing this work who may also have suggestions for you. But from my perspective, sort of at that higher level, I see different communities taking somewhat different approaches. But it's a really important place to start with that. You know, okay. How do we reach out? How do we make sure those survivors are included? Those communities know that we're doing this work and have a chance to have that input.
Thank you, Kisha. Microphone numéro 1, number 1.
Sego se wogoigo ganadio yungyaks wagina seal wagi delodo akozasne digido. My name is Rick Oakes and I'm from Akwesasne. I know for all the people that are in here, for all the territories that are in here, we all had our different ways of letting our loved ones go in doing our funerals, and when we had funerals and those that had passed before us, and the words that were being said during those times. And I know that each and every one of these cultures that are sitting here in all these nations, they all had their own processes and ways of doing that. But when we're talking about, we're looking for our loved ones from residential schools, and they say, how are we going to release them and so that they can find their way back? And I know the lady that was up here talking about the memorialization and things like that. But in our way, in each and every, in our language, I always watch the elders and listen to the elders, and in their language, they had those words that were certain, that would uplift the spirits of the people, and when they were able to send those individuals off back to the spirit world once they were found, you know. And I know that for us, if we were to find any areas where there were graves or anything like that, I know that we would gather there and we wouldn't disturb the ground or anything like that, but we would make sure that we would say those words. If we couldn't identify anybody in there, all the people that were in there, we would make sure through our tobacco burning that we included everybody that was there so that we wouldn't miss nobody. And they would do a tobacco burning and we do ceremony there, and we would make sure that we had everybody that was there that was included in that tobacco burning so that we could send them off, you know? Because right now I know that it's hard to go into all these different areas and to identify everybody that's there. But to be sure that our relatives are being sent to the Creator, back to the Creator, that we would include in those words everybody that was there. And that's our way of how we do that. I know that it was maybe in the past 10 years, this group of people come up, they were doing highway work, and they come across all these graves and everything. I think there were 30 of them. And there was a lot of them, they were all wrapped in white Muslim cloth. This is how they took them out of the ground because of that construction. But nobody came there to claim them of who they were, so they come to Akwesasne, and they asked us if we would take them, and we said yes. Yes, we would take them. And we put them, yes. And we brought them back into the back of our longhouse, and we dug these trenches, and very carefully we placed them, and there were small babies in there. These were, and when we did that, and we did that ceremony, and each and every year we do Ogiwe, and that's the Feast of the Dead. And that's when we come around, we have our food, and we do that in the spring and then in the fall. And we do that every year to honor our people that have passed on. So I know that there's a lot of questions of saying, how do we identify and ask or something like that? I know each and every one of these leaders in here, they have the language to include everybody, that when they're doing that ceremony, they have the words and the language to identify everybody. They don't leave nobody out, because today it's hard. You know, we're talking how many years forensics they talked about. How do you identify? But I know that in my heart, I know that each and every one of us here has those words to say. And that's all I can say. Miigwech.
Yo, Niawan. Microphone numéro 3, number 3, please.
Ani bonjour, Gijiana Kwituk, Dego. My English name is Shauna Pitwanakwit. My question is about, that was brought up regarding DNA samples to help with identification, if possible, of the bones. So my question is, who will hold those DNA samples and who will care for those DNA samples? As we know with what we do with the murdered and missing Indigenous women that are missing, in collection of the DNA, RCMP holds those. Recently, the police have been using the DNA samples through the public samples to find out if they're Indigenous or not through the family DNA systems. And so they were able to locate our people on there for crimes that happened 10, 20 years ago. And so my question is in regards to safety. I don't think that we want those DNA samples housed or held in care by government. And so I'm just wondering what questions or has there been discussions who will hold these DNA samples?
Very good question.
Thank you for that question. I think the best way forward is having a national DNA strategy that is a partnership between the forensic experts and families that is embedded in Indigenous ethics, that looks at custodianship, ownership, and protection of these. And certainly we also need law that will indicate Indigenous law and Canadian law as well, that any of these samples are used only for the purposes of identification. In addition, that individuals that give a sample, that if they want to withdraw the sample, they can do so. So the process is done so that you can go back to the original sample and that can be destroyed. There needs to be many conversations about this because we may not be able to identify direct to a family, but there's a possibility that maybe we could identify children to their nation or their community. And that actually requires Indigenous DNA data banks. And so the National Advisory Committee we've talked about this. We have yet to make a decision about our next steps, but there certainly has been many conversations about this.
Merci beaucoup. Merci, Rebecca. Microphone numéro 2, microphone number 2. Lady? Lady?
Hello?
Yeah, it's your turn.
Thank you. My name is Antoinette Lafleur. I come from Marlacrosse. I'm a survivor of 10 years. I was barely 5 when I entered the convent. But most of the people I meet on the road, they say, "Parlez-vous français?" And I say, "No, I only speak Cree." But anyway, more on a positive note, I went to see the Pope last year where we told our stories. We told him our stories and he listened and he believed and he apologized. I spent a week in Rome with him. And it was so surprising. When we were little kids, the bishop would come to the convent, and the closest you got to a bishop was to kiss his ring. You couldn't even touch him anywhere. And when I approached the Pope, I was so like anxious. I was like, what do I do? Do I touch him or do I just say hello? But you know what he did? He reached out his hand. And I shook it. And it gave me such a sense of belonging. At last, we are telling our stories. And he believed our stories and he apologized. To me, the only person that went to see him from northern Saskatchewan, I don't know how, the northern Saskatchewan is such a large place. How in the world did I get to see the Pope? But it was so rewarding. This year I went to New York. I sat on a panel of the United Nations. I told my story. Again, I told my story, they listened, and they believed. What I got when I was finished my story was all people coming around to shake my hand, and really, it was very emotional. But on a positive side, I see there are a lot of women rising to the top of all the things. It's a women's time of the year to get those high-paying jobs. I see so many of them. And I'm so glad about it. When I became a firefighter for 26 years, forest firefighter. I wore the banana suit for 26 years.
And
I was the boss of a lot of men, and it was nice to see the men bossing the men around. But anyway, you know, I did it because I wanted women to be hired. And there was after that, after my 26 years, I saw so many women being taken to go firefighting. So it's the time for women to go out there.
And would you have a question for the National Advisory Committee members? Yeah.
No, it's just that their stories are more like my stories, and I don't want to keep repeating it because we have such little time. But as Native women, we are very resilient people, and all we want is three things. We want respect, recognition, and justice.
And you are right. Yeah, thank you, Miigwech. Microphone numéro 1, s'il vous plaît.
Hey, my name is Ganandio from the Mohawk territory of Akwesasne, and I was a inmate of the Mohawk Institute, a notorious residential school in Canada. But I have a couple very, very specific questions. But first, I want to give you some good news. And that is, when we had our session in Toronto, it was acknowledged by the city of Toronto that one of the pedestrian bridges leading to central Toronto will be named after my friend, Joey Commanda. And we met in Toronto a month ago, and we're firming up plans. So one of those bridges will be named in honor of the last fatality coming out of the Mohawk Institute. It'll be called the Joey Commanda Bridge. But along with that, when it comes to the hard science of investigating homicides that occurred within on the grounds of these residential schools, we have made a commitment at Akwesasne that we want to and will seek the active investigation into the circumstances under which those children died. We need scientists, we need pathologists, we need medical examiners, we need policing agencies. We need to hold those people and institutions accountable for the murders of those children, and the only way we can affect that is if we have the specific skills that these women have in order to bring about justice. One of the things that happened last year was the Pope was here. He did issue an apology, but what he omitted was an outright declaration that the church would accept unequivocal responsibility for the murder of thousands of Native children under their custody. The only way we're going to get to that point is if we have, in criminal investigations, if we isolate each residential school as a crime scene. And what I'm going to ask the panelists is this. One, are they committed to the enactment of a federal legislation similar to the Native American Graves and Protection Act in the United States? And two, if they would commit themselves to working with each one of our residential school survivor committee to initiate and work with the policing agencies to identify the circumstances under which those children died, and then to bring about justice by bringing those institutions to be held to be criminally responsible for what they did. So we need that, as our group desperately needs the hard science to substantiate our claims. And I'll give you one warning now, everyone here, is that there are predators out there in the media and elsewhere, and that if we engage in acts of gross exaggeration when it comes to this issue, that we are going to be undermined and attacked, and they're already preparing to do that. So hold close to the truth, speak to the truth, and the truth can only come about when we have the hard physical evidence that in fact murders were committed within these schools. So my question is that, would you support the enactment of federal legislation that protects the burial sites? And will you work with us on a national front to apply those sciences necessary to bring about these criminal charges? Thank you.
Thank you. Will it be possible to answer by yes or no?
The short answer on the first piece, I'll leave the second one to my colleague Rebecca. 100%. There are many reasons we need a framework like that, federal legislation that ensures that these places are protected and that all of our ancestors are able to come home, whether they be the murdered children or whether they be in other contexts. So I, for one, am 100% in support of that, and I'll just turn over to Rebecca for the second piece, because that's beyond my expertise.
Yeah, you pointed out one of the oversights, that there is no national death investigation system, and we work alongside our law enforcement, including Indigenous police services, and also legal frameworks. And so we don't actually have a national death investigation system. So me as a forensic pathologist, my opportunity to practice is in Ontario. And so to practice in other provinces and other territories requires a whole process. And we saw that also with the TRC, different physicians providing services having these barriers. So that would be one way, is having this national death investigation system to achieve the goal that you've identified.
Merci. I have 9 minutes left and I have 3 speakers. So j'ai 9 minutes qui restent à l'agenda et j'ai 3 interlocutrices. Je vais commencer number 2, then I will move to number 3, and I will end with number 1. So we have 9 minutes.
Hattie, my name is Terry Luki. My chief name is Yabali. I am Stalaten First Nation. I work for Natliwatan as their project manager for the IRS. So some of the preliminary stuff, some of the information I've seen or conversations I've had already around the children that we do know of. I believe they were from the National Registry. Some of the conversations were around family lines and like last names, families that are now extinct. There is no surviving family members. Like, it's like God. So how does that play out with what, forensics, all of that kind of thing? That is my question.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup for that question. Yes, that is certainly a real possibility. And so earlier I had a question about DNA and testing through that. And so in that situation, it may be, instead of directly linking to a family, the next step would be to trying to link to a community or nation. And so you would look at the DNA, we call profile in the bones, and then compare that to Indigenous DNA databanks to link that person back to a community or nation. So that might be the way forward.
Merci beaucoup, Rebecca. nous nous déplaçons au microphone numéro 3.
Thank you. I'll be quick. My name's Catherine Nichols, and I just wanted to thank you for all the information you provided on this panel. My question is, I'm wondering if you can speak specifically to next steps. Would you recommend multidisciplinary teams that also includes geophysicists, forensic anthropologists, and DNA experts? And does the National Advisory Committee have these expertise represented on their committee? Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, and good to see you. So, yes, I think having multidisciplinary teams is really important. So the National Advisory Committee does have folks who are represented on there that have expertise in archives, oral history, geophysics and remote sensing, forensics, including aspects of DNA, although both of our forensic pathologists use DNA but may not do a lot of that analysis. I think it really depends on the needs of community as well, right? So thinking about this in terms of what is the expertise that might be needed to get the answers the community might be looking for, because as we've heard, some will want to go the DNA route, others may choose not to. I think having an approach that brings together that expertise is really important, and the NAC does have aspects of that, and we are working to make ourselves more visible to you and to others who are doing this, and then to maybe assist you in figuring out what that team might look like and who you might need. And we also need more training around some of these aspects, because there is a big capacity gap even in the sort of professional side, so not just on the community side, but how many people actually know how to do geophysics for this, how to do DNA for these types of questions remains an ongoing concern for us as well, because we have a sense, I think, of what that national pool of people looks like, and it's very, very small. So I think we're also hoping to continue to work with the Office of the Special Interlocutor as they continue their very important work to be able to come up with more concrete, here are some models for how this work might happen. I'll also just really briefly note, at our table over there, our lovely colleague Carmen has some brochures. They're a navigator document, which kind of overviews the different pieces of this for folks who are looking maybe to build a team or to consider some of that. We have some physical copies, and we also have copies on our website, so you can come and visit that, and we can leave anything we have left maybe at the NCTR table downstairs as well. So we encourage you to pick up a copy of that if you have more questions.
Merci beaucoup, Kisha. Microphone numéro 1.
Gwedi o yajats ganyak gahaga got nistan seragana. I have a question, and it'll follow this. Is at this moment the ganyak gahaga got nistan sera are actually in play with all of these aspects that we're talking about right now, and we're implementing all of the things that have happened. But at this very, very, very moment, we need an affidavit. We just have to send in an affidavit in the next couple of minutes, and we're really looking for a commissioner of votes. Is there one in the room?
Good question. I'm sure there is one. Is there one?
We got it? Oh, one from Quebec. Yes, that's the important part of it.
OK. Est-ce que nous avons un du Québec?
Otherwise, I gotta run with my moccasins all the way to Ganamaga.
So we wish you the best, yeah.
Okay.
OK.
Okay.
Merci beaucoup. So, en votre nom, j'aimerais remercier les 3 membres du comité aviseur national pour votre collaboration, et they deserve a good round of applause.